Have you ever felt destiny arrive, not as a whisper, but as a brutal, searing brand that yokes your soul to the one person who can either save you or shatter you completely? For me, it felt like hope. A foolish, fleeting hope that tasted like ash the very moment he turned his cold eyes on me. Chapter 1. The Scent of Ash. How much cruelty can one wolf endure before she stops being a pack member and becomes simply a thing to be discarded? My alpha answered that question under the light of the sacred moon, not with a blow, but with a single word that severed our fated bond and left my worthless heart still beating in the dirt. But the story doesn't start there. No. It began hours earlier, with the sticky, green paste on my fingers and the scent of false hope in the air. The warrior I was tending to, a hulking brute named Fenris, flinched as I smoothed the poultice over the gash on his arm. A low growl rumbled in his chest, a sound of pure irritation. "Careful, half-breed," he muttered, his voice a gravelly scrape. "Your human weakness makes your touch soft." I said nothing. My gaze stayed fixed on the wound, on the way the feverfew and crushed river moss were already calming the angry red skin. This was my place in the Black Moon Pack. I was Selene Vera, the girl born of a human mother, the constant reminder of a bloodline they considered tainted. My father, a true warrior, had died years ago, and his strength had been buried with him. All that was left was me, a shadow in the corner of the den, useful only for the old remedies my mother had taught me. Remedies the pack shaman called peasant magic. Right up until the whispering sickness had taken 3 of our elders, and only my strange herbs had kept it from taking a 4th. They never spoke of that. It was an uncomfortable truth, a secret success they preferred to forget, because remembering would mean I had value. Enough. The voice cut through the den's dusty air like a shard of ice. Alpha Lycan stood in the entrance, a silhouette against the dying sun. He was beautiful, in the way a perfectly crafted dagger is beautiful, all sharp lines and deadly promise. His silver eyes swept over the scene, his expression one of indulgent condescension. "Fenris, we have a ceremony to prepare for. Don't let the girls smear any more mud on you." Fenris scrambled to his feet, bowing his head. "Alpha." Lyran's gaze slid to me, and for a breathtaking second, I felt it. The pull, the faint, thrumming whisper of a possibility that tonight the moon goddess might finally grant me a place, a mate, a reason to be more than the pack's stray. I lowered my eyes, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, because what if that pull led to him? What if the alpha, the one who looked at me with such casual disdain, was the one fate had chosen for me? He was our leader because he was the strongest, the purest, the most ruthless. Claiming me would be a stain on his perfect record. He took a step closer, the scent of pine and cold authority washing over me. He didn't look at my face, but at my hands. "Still playing with weeds, Selene?" he asked, his voice a silken mockery. "You have your mother's hands, frail, human." He flicked his gaze back to Fenris. "Go. The moon rises soon." As Fenris hurried away, Lycan lingered. The den grew quiet, the air thick with unspoken things. He watched me clean my workstation, his presence a heavy weight on my shoulders. I could feel his eyes tracing the line of my spine, and a shiver I couldn't control ran through me. Was it fear or something else? Something worse? Hope. It was hope, that treacherous little monster. The thought was so absurd, so dangerous, that a small, hysterical laugh almost escaped my lips. His voice dropped lower, a conspiratorial murmur that was somehow more threatening than a shout. "You know what tonight is, don't you?" I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. The moon goddess chooses. She binds souls. She corrects mistakes. The emphasis on the last word was a deliberate twist of the knife. He was reminding me of what I was. A mistake. A flaw in the bloodline. He leaned in, his breath ghosting over my ear. Pray she doesn't make another one tonight." With that, he was gone, leaving me alone with the scent of herbs and the cold, creeping dread that my last chance at a life was about to become my public execution. Chapter 2. The Snapping of a Thread. Have you ever felt destiny arrive, not as a whisper, but as a brutal, searing brand that yokes your soul to the one person who can save you or shatter you completely? Standing in the center of the ceremonial circle, bathed in the ethereal silver glow of the sacred moon, I felt it. A golden thread, spun from moonlight and magic, shot from my chest and slammed into his. My breath caught. My world stopped. The thread connected me to Alpha Lycan. For one perfect, impossible moment, there was only ecstasy. A wave of warmth and belonging so powerful it brought tears to my eyes. The bond clicked into place, a feeling of absolute rightness, of coming home. I was his. He was mine. The whispers in the pack died. Every eye was on us. I looked at Lycan, my heart wide open, my soul bare for him to see. This was it. No more half-breed, no more outcast. I would be Luna, his Luna. A foolish, fleeting hope flooded every inch of my being. Then he looked at me, and the hope tasted like ash. There was no recognition in his silver eyes, no answering joy. There was only a flicker of surprise, quickly replaced by something cold and horrifying. Disgust. The golden thread connecting us pulsed with his revulsion, sending a nauseating wave of rejection straight into my heart. He masked it quickly, his face smoothing into a neutral, commanding expression. He raised a hand, silencing the confused murmurs of the pack. "Selena Vera," he called, his voice booming across the clearing. "Come forward." My feet moved on their own, numb and clumsy. The pack parted for me, their faces a mixture of shock, pity, and cruel amusement. I could feel their thoughts like biting insects. Her? The weakling? Impossible. I stopped before him, trembling, the glorious warmth of the bond now tainted with the icy chill of his emotions. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was misreading it. He looked down at me, a predator examining a broken-backed rabbit. "The moon goddess has a strange sense of humor," he said, his voice low enough for only me to hear. Then he raised it for the pack to witness. "She has blessed me with a mate bond tonight." A few sycophantic whoops broke the silence. I stood frozen, my world hanging on his next word. "But a bond is a measure of strength," Lycan continued, his voice hardening. "It is meant to forge a powerful Luna for a powerful Alpha, a she-wolf who can bear strong pups and stand as a symbol of our pack's purity and dominance." He turned, pacing before the circle, a master performer playing to his audience. "What the goddess has offered me tonight is not a gift, it is an insult." A gasp rippled through the crowd. My blood ran cold. He spun back to me, his handsome face twisted into a mask of righteous fury. He pointed a finger at my chest. "She offers me this, a half-human weakling, the daughter of a woman who was never pack-marked, whose blood carries the fragility of her kind. Am I to accept a Luna who would taint my bloodline? Who would give me weak, sniveling pups?" "No!" the pack roared, their earlier shock twisting into a unified, ugly chant. Tears streamed down my face, hot and shameful. The bond was a screaming agony inside me, a living thing being torn apart by his words. "Alpha, please," I whispered, my voice breaking. He ignored me. He raised his hands, a dark energy beginning to swirl around them. Alpha Lycan of the Black Moon Pack, reject this bond," he bellowed. "I reject this mate. I sever the tie that shames my name and my pack." He slammed his palms together. The world went white. The golden thread between us didn't just break, it detonated. The pain was absolute, a cataclysm in my soul that ripped a raw scream from my throat. I collapsed to the ground, convulsing, the feeling of him being violently scraped out of my very essence. Through the haze of my agony, I heard the sound that would haunt my nightmares for the rest of an obviously very short life. Laughter. The pack was laughing. And above it all, the clear, ringing sound of my alpha's amusement as he watched his fated mate break. "Get her out of my sight," he commanded, his voice bored now that the show was over. "Leave the trash in the cursed borderlands. Let the beasts and the rot have her." Rough hands grabbed my arms, dragging my limp body out of the circle, away from the moonlight, and into a darkness that felt like a mercy. Chapter 3. A Heartbeat in the Dirt. The forest floor was a cold, damp mattress for the dying. Here, in the cursed borderlands, the air itself was different, heavy and thick, like breathing in grave dirt and sorrow. The trees were skeletal claws against a bruised purple sky, their branches bare even in what should have been a lush season. No birds sang, no insects chirped. There was only a profound, unnatural silence, the kind that presses in on you, suffocating all thought. They had dumped me here hours ago. The agony of the severed bond had faded to a dull, hollow ache deep in my bones, a permanent empty space where a soulmate used to be. My body was a traitor. It refused to just stop. My heart insisted on beating its slow, pointless rhythm. My lungs kept drawing in the foul, stagnant air. I had tried to walk, to find a river to drown in, but my legs wouldn't obey. Now, I just lay on a bed of slick, rotting leaves, my cheek pressed against the cold earth, waiting. The fever was a welcome fog, blurring the edges of my despair. It felt like a kindness. Because a wolf who has been rejected by her fated mate, cast out by her pack, has no reason to live. It is the end. Everyone knows this. It was in that hazy state, somewhere between living and not, that I heard it. A whimper. It was so faint, I thought it was the wind, but there was no wind. I lifted my head, the effort monumental. The sound came again, a tiny, pathetic cry of distress that somehow pierced through the thick fog in my mind. It was close. Pushing myself up on trembling arms, I crawled toward the noise, my tattered dress snagging on thorns and roots. The world swayed, but the sound pulled me forward, an invisible string tugging on something deep inside me I thought Lycan had killed. My healer's instinct. Under the gnarled roots of a dead oak tree, nestled in a shallow burrow, was a bundle of dark fur. A pup. It was impossibly small, its eyes barely open, shivering violently despite the humid air. Its scent was strange. Wolf, yes, but with an undercurrent of something else. Something wilder, like ozone before a lightning strike. It was alone. Abandoned. Just like me. A wave of feeling so powerful it almost knocked me over washed through me. It wasn't pity. It was a fierce, primal recognition. Discarded. This tiny, helpless creature had been left here to die, just as I had. Without thinking, I reached out and gathered the pup into my arms. It was so light. I pulled it against my chest, tucking it inside the tatters of my dress, trying to share what little body heat I had left. It whimpered again, nuzzling against my skin. Its tiny claws pricked me, but its desperation was a balm to the gaping wound in my soul. I started to hum, a broken, tuneless lullaby my human mother used to sing to me, a song about a lost star finding its way home. I knew it was pointless. We were both going to die here. The cold would take us, or a predator would find us. But as I held the shivering pup, a tiny spark ignited in the vast, cold emptiness of my chest. My life was over. My worth was nothing. But maybe I could give this one small creature a few more moments of warmth before the end. Maybe my worthless life could serve one final purpose. The thought had barely formed when a twig snapped behind me. It was loud, a cannon shot in the dead silence. Every instinct screamed, "Danger!" I curled myself tighter around the pup, my body instinctively shielding it. My head whipped around, my heart hammering against my ribs. A shadow detached itself from the deeper gloom of the trees. It was massive. taller than any wolf I had ever seen, broader at the shoulders, radiating an aura of power so immense, so suffocating, that the very air seemed to bend around it. The scent hit me a second later. Not the familiar scent of my pack, but a wild, terrifying fragrance of pine, cold stone, and barely restrained rage. Golden eyes, gleaming with terrifying intelligence, fixed on me from the darkness. He took a step forward, and then another, moving with a silent, predatory grace that was utterly mesmerizing. This was no ordinary rogue. This was an alpha, a king in his own right. And I was trespassing on his land, a piece of trash discarded by his enemies, clutching a secret I didn't even understand. He stopped a few feet away, a titan of fur and muscle, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me more than any fever, that I was looking at my end. Chapter 4. The Weight of a Gaze. He was the forest floor and the midnight sky all at once, a being made of shadow and power. The alpha stood over me, a silent mountain of black fur, and the world seemed to shrink around his presence. I could smell him. Pine needles crushed underfoot, the clean scent of cold stone, and something else. A wild electric tang of pure, undiluted rage held in check by a will of iron. My heart, which I thought had forgotten how to feel anything but pain, now hammered a frantic rhythm of pure terror against my ribs. Because this was not the casual cruelty of my old pack. This was something ancient, something absolute. His golden eyes, the color of hardened sap in the last rays of sunlight, were not looking at me. They were looking through me, assessing every broken piece of my soul. "You are a long way from home, little wolf," he said. His voice wasn't a shout. It was worse. It was a low, quiet rumble that vibrated through the ground, a sound that promised to splinter bone and tear flesh. It was the sound of the earth preparing for a quake. I couldn't speak. My throat was a desert of fear. I could only clutch the tiny, warm bundle in my arms tighter, my body a pathetic shield against a god. What could I even say? That I had been thrown away? That I was no one, from nowhere, with nothing left to lose? It was the truth. And because it was the truth, it was the most dangerous thing I could admit. In the wild, weakness is an invitation for death. The alpha took another step, the ground barely crunching under his immense weight. He was a master of silence, a predator in his own domain. His gaze dropped from my face to the shivering life form hidden in the folds of my ruined dress. A change, a flicker in those molten gold eyes. The predatory assessment sharpened into something else entirely, something fiercely possessive. He lowered his massive head, his snout twitching, and the scent of him was overwhelming. I felt a growl build in my own chest, a tiny, suicidal spark of defiance. Mine. The pup was mine to protect. He saw the movement. A low snarl escaped his lips, and it was not a warning. It was a promise. "What do you have? There?" Each word was a stone dropped into a deep, dark well. Every instinct screamed at me to submit, to roll over, to show him my throat and beg for a swift end. It's what I should have done. It's what any sane wolf would have done. But looking down at the tiny, trusting creature in my arms, sanity didn't seem to matter anymore. He was alone. I was alone. Maybe we could be alone together, if only for a few more seconds. So I did the only thing I could. I met the alpha's gaze. I let him see the terror, the grief, the utter hopelessness, and the one single spark that refused to be extinguished. I lifted my chin. "Kill me if you must," I whispered, my voice a ragged, broken thing. "But don't hurt him." Silence. The world held its breath. The giant wolf did not move. He just watched me, his head tilted slightly as if my words were a strange puzzle he was trying to solve. The rage in his scent lessened, replaced by something I couldn't name. It was a profound stillness, a moment of consideration that was more terrifying than any threat. He had expected me to beg for my life. He had not expected me to bargain for another's. I had surprised him, and in this world, surprising a creature like him was either a death sentence or something else. Finally, after an eternity that stretched and snapped, he seemed to come to a decision. The immense power that had been pressing down on me receded, just enough for me to take a shuddering breath. He straightened to his full, terrifying height, a dark king surveying his domain. His golden eyes held mine, and this time, there was no question, no assessment. There was only command. His voice was quiet, absolute, and sealed my fate. Up. Chapter 5. The den of beasts following the silent command. I stumbled to my feet, my legs shaking like newborn foals. The giant alpha watched my every move, his patience a thin, fraying thread. He didn't offer a hand. He didn't offer a kind word. He simply turned and started walking into the deep woods, a silent order for me to follow. The journey was a blur of terror and exhaustion. He moved with an eerie grace, never making a sound, while I crashed through the undergrowth behind him, my every step a clumsy announcement of my weakness. The pup, now named Kaelin in the quiet of my mind, was a small, warm weight against my chest, a living anchor in a nightmare. Each time I faltered, the alpha would stop and look back, his golden eyes burning with an impatience that spurred me onward more effectively than any threat. Because his silence was the loudest threat of all. After what felt like an eternity, the oppressive woods gave way to a clearing. Before us rose his fortress. It was not a den. It was a weapon. Hewn from black, volcanic rock, it clawed at the sky, all sharp angles and unforgiving stone. There were no welcoming lights, no sounds of a pack. There was only the grim finality of a place built for war. It was a place of shadows. It was a place of secrets. It was a place designed to keep the world out and to keep its prisoners in. As he led me through a massive iron-bound gate, I felt the gazes of his pack on me. They were ghosts in the twilight, lean, hard wolves with eyes that held no pity. They saw my torn dress, my strange scent, the emblem of my old pack tattooed on my shoulder. They smelled my fear. A low growl started, then another, a chorus of suspicion and hostility. They saw me for what I was, the enemy's trash. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the familiar feeling of being judged, of being hated. But this was different. This wasn't the mocking disdain of Lyran's pack. This was the cold, calculating assessment of true predators. They weren't deciding if I was weak. They were deciding if I was a threat. The alpha, my captor, ignored them all. He led me through cold stone corridors that echoed with our footsteps, finally stopping before a heavy wooden door. He pushed it open, revealing a sparse but clean room, a bed with furs, a small fireplace, and a window barred with iron. A cage. A comfortable cage, but a cage nonetheless. He motioned for me to enter, his gesture dismissive, as if he were shelving a book he might read later. I scurried inside, my back immediately finding the far wall, putting as much distance between us as possible. He didn't follow. He stood in the doorway, his massive frame blocking out the light. "You will stay here," he commanded. "You will not leave this room. Food will be brought. If you try to run..." He let the sentence hang in the air, unfinished, because it didn't need to be finished. The promise of what he would do was clear in the hard set of his jaw. Before I could even nod, a new figure appeared behind him. A she-wolf, tall and severe, with eyes the color of chips of ice. Her scent was sharp, dominant. A beta. Her gaze raked over me with open contempt, before settling on the pup in my arms. "Kale," she said, her voice clipped. "What is this? You bring another pack's filth into our den?" The alpha, Kale, didn't even turn to look at her. His golden eyes remained locked on me. "She is my concern, Lyra, not yours." The she-wolf, Lyra, bristled. "She is a stray, and she holds the child." "I am aware." Kale's voice was dangerously quiet now. "Leave us." Lyra's scent flared with indignation, but she obeyed, vanishing from the doorway. Kale's gaze lingered on me for a moment longer, a look so intense it felt like a physical touch. He wasn't protecting me. He was claiming ownership. I was not a guest, not a prisoner. I was a problem, a resource, a thing he had found that now belonged to him. The question of what he wanted, what he planned to do with me and the pup, was a terrifying, unanswered void. Then he pulled the heavy door shut, and the sound of a bolt sliding into place echoed in the sudden, deafening silence of my new prison. Chapter 6. A Whisper Against the Storm. The first day in the cage was a study in silence. The second was an exercise in pacing. By the third, a terrifying numbness began to set in, a resignation that this cold stone room was my new world. Food would appear outside the door, but no one spoke to me. I could hear the sounds of a pack outside, training, talking, living, but I was completely, utterly separate from it. My only companion was Kalen. The tiny pup was my sun and my moon. I cleaned him, I sang to him, I curled around him at night, and in his innocent presence, I found a fragile reason to keep breathing. Because he needed me. It was a simple, powerful truth that kept me from shattering. But on the evening of the third day, something changed. Kalen, who had been sleeping peacefully, began to whimper. It wasn't a cry of hunger or cold. It was a sound of deep distress, a thin, reedy wail that quickly escalated. I picked him up, rocking him, humming my mother's lullaby, but it didn't work. A strange energy began to pulse from his tiny body, a visible shimmer in the air that made my teeth ache. The air grew thick, crackling with a wild, untamed power. The stones of the wall seemed to hum. It was magic, raw and uncontrolled. His wail became a shriek, and the energy exploded outwards. The wooden bowl on the floor splintered. The furs on the bed stood on end. It was like being at the center of a tiny, contained thunderstorm. This was not normal. This was not a power any wolf pup should possess. What was he? The bolt on my door scraped back, and the door flew open. Two hulking warriors stood there, their eyes wide with alarm. They took a step inside, then recoiled as if they had hit a solid wall. The pup's energy, his raw, magical fear, was a shield they could not penetrate. One of them turned and shouted down the hall, "Alpha, now!" Soon the doorway was crowded. Lyra, the icy beta, was there, along with an older, scarred wolf who smelled of herbs and wisdom, a shaman. And then Kale pushed through them all. His presence filled the room, his authority a tangible force. He saw the shimmering energy, the terrified pup in my arms, and his face became a grim mask of stone. He tried to step forward, but even he, the mighty Alpha, was stopped by the invisible wall of power. He grunted, pushing against it, his muscles cording in his arms, but it was no use. The child's fear was absolute. The shaman spoke, his voice grave. "Alpha, the boy's power is untethered. It is born of a lineage we do not understand. We cannot reach him." Kale's frustration was a palpable thing, a dark cloud in the room. He looked at the screaming pup, then at me. His eyes weren't angry. They were desperate. He, the Alpha who commanded legions, the beast who made the forest tremble, was helpless. He was a father who could not comfort his own child. It was a crack in his armor, a moment of pure, raw vulnerability that struck me deeper than any fear. Without thinking, I did the only thing I could. Ignoring the shocked gasps from the doorway, I held Kalen closer. I pressed my cheek against his fur, shutting out the fearful onlookers. I let my own sense of calm, the fragile peace I found only with him, flow out of me. I didn't just hum the lullaby this time. I sang the words, the strange, ancient words my mother had taught me, words that spoke of anchor stones and quiet harbors. "Naloma, Naloma, Serath An," I whispered, my voice soft against the storm. Slowly, miraculously, the shimmering energy in the air began to fade. The crackling sound softened to a hum, then to nothing. Kalen's shrieks subsided into whimpers, and finally, into soft, snuffing breaths. The storm was over. He was asleep in my arms, safe and calm. I looked up. The entire room, the warriors, the shaman, Lyra, and Alpha Kale himself, was staring at me. Their faces were a mixture of disbelief and awe. The weak, human-tainted girl, the discarded trash, had just walked through a storm that had stopped an alpha in his tracks. In their eyes, I was no longer just a refugee. I was an anomaly, a key to a lock they didn't understand. And as I met Kale's unreadable, burning golden gaze, I realized my situation had just become infinitely more dangerous. I was no longer useless. I was valuable. Chapter 7. The Weight of a Secret. The silence left behind in the room was louder than the storm had been. The warriors were gone, their fearful scent still lingering in the air, but Kyle remained. He stood in the doorway, an unmovable sentinel of black stone and shadowed fur, his presence sucking all the air from my small world. Kalen was a warm, sleeping weight in my arms, his little chest rising and falling in a peaceful rhythm that felt like a miracle. I had done that. I had brought him that peace. The thought was a small, fragile shield against the terrifying alpha who was studying me as if I were a page written in a language he had never seen before. After an eternity, he moved. He stepped into the room, and this time the heavy door swung shut behind him, encasing us in a sudden, suffocating intimacy. "That song," he said, his voice a low vibration that I felt in my bones. What was it? I clutched Kalen closer, my knuckles white. My mother's lullaby. It was the only piece of her I had left, a secret melody from a life before this one. To give it to him felt like giving him a key to my very soul. Because a secret is only a shield when it is kept. "It's just a song," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "An old one." "Old songs have power," he countered, his gaze unwavering. He took another slow, deliberate step. He wasn't threatening me, not exactly. It was something more unnerving. He was curious. The energy from the boy, it did not touch you. The shaman said it was born of a rage that should have torn a wolf apart. Why did it not harm you? Here it was. The question that could be either my salvation or my condemnation. The truth was, I didn't know. My mother was human. She knew herbs and sang strange songs. She used to say our blood was different, not weak, but quiet. She said it was blood that knew how to listen to the world instead of just shouting at it. My pack had called that weakness. What would this alpha call it? I remembered his words to Lyra. The boy's power is of a lineage we do not understand. Perhaps my lineage was a mystery he was desperate to solve. My mother was human, I said, the admission tasting like ash on my tongue. She taught me things, remedies, songs. She said our blood was different. Kale's expression didn't change, but a flicker of understanding lit his golden eyes. He wasn't disgusted. He was intrigued. He saw a piece of the puzzle click into place. He stopped just an arm's length away, his sheer size overwhelming. The scent of pine and cold rage was still there, but underneath it there was something else. A hint of exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. He was a man carrying a heavy, invisible burden. Just like me. He reached out a hand, a huge, calloused hand with claws that could rip me to shreds. I flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping my lips. His hand froze in midair. For a long moment, we were a statue of fear and power. Then, very slowly, he redirected his hand, not towards me, but towards Kalen. His touch was shockingly gentle as his fingers brushed against the pup's dark fur. Kalen didn't stir. He just snuggled deeper into my arms, safe and sound. Kale let out a slow, controlled breath. A sliver of the immense tension in his shoulders seemed to dissolve. He looked from the sleeping pup to my face, and for the first time, I felt like he was seeing me. Not a stray, not a half-breed, but a solution. "Your confinement is over," he stated, his voice flat and commanding once more. but your freedom is not yours. From now on, you will stay with the child. You will not leave his side. Where he goes, you go." He straightened up, the moment of connection gone, replaced by the cold authority of the alpha. "You are his protector." The word echoed in the silence of the room. Protector. It sounded so much better than prisoner, but I had a sinking feeling they were just two different names for the same cage. My life was no longer my own. It now belonged to the child, and by extension to the terrifying alpha who ruled over us both. Chapter 8. The Circle of Wolves. The freedom Kale had promised felt more like a longer leash, each link forged from the suspicious stares of his pack. The next morning, I was permitted to leave my room, but only with Lyra, the icy beta, as my shadow. With Kaelin strapped to my chest in a soft leather sling, I stepped out into the main den of the fortress. It was a cavernous space, a hive of activity. But the moment I appeared, a hush fell over the assembled wolves. Conversations died, training ceased, every head turned, and 100 pairs of hostile eyes fixed on me. They weren't just curious anymore. They had heard the story of the pup storm. Now, they were afraid. In the world of wolves, fear and hatred are two sides of the same coin. "Keep your eyes down, Stray," Lyra hissed beside me, her voice a low threat. "You are here on the Alpha's sufferance. Nothing more." I did as she said, focusing on the rough-hewn stone floor, trying to make myself smaller. We walked towards the training grounds, a vast, open courtyard where warriors sparred with a brutal, efficient grace. They moved like a well-oiled machine, their bodies honed weapons of muscle and instinct. This pack was different from Black Moon. Lyran's pack was built on ego and cruelty. This pack, it was built on something harder, something more disciplined. It was built for survival, because their alpha was a man who understood that survival was a constant, vicious war. We sat on a stone bench at the edge of the grounds, ostensibly to let Kaelin get some fresh air. But I knew the real reason. I was being put on display. Kale wanted his pack to see me, to get used to the strange she-wolf who was now a permanent fixture at the pup's side. It was a test. Lyra stood over me, her arms crossed, her presence a constant, chilling pressure. "You think you are special," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "Because you sang a little song? The child is a powerful anomaly. Your little trick means nothing." "I don't think anything," I answered, my voice quiet. "I just want to keep him safe." "Safe?" she scoffed. "You are Lyran's filth. The alpha of Black Moon is a snake, and his cast-offs are no better." She leaned in closer, her cold blue eyes narrowed. "I am this pack's beta. I protect our alpha. If I find that you are a threat, if I sense even a hint of betrayal, I will tear the throat from your neck myself, and I will enjoy it." Her threat was so raw, so filled with vicious certainty, that a cold dread washed over me. This was my life now, walking a tightrope over a pit of hungry predators. Just then, a young warrior, bold and foolish, sauntered over. He grinned, a flash of white teeth in a scarred face. "So this is the little witch," he said, his eyes on me but his hand reaching for Kaelin. "Let's see what's so special about the alpha's new pet." Before I could think, before the fear could paralyze me, something else took over. A deep, primal instinct. My hand shot out and clamped around his wrist like a vice. A sound ripped from my own throat, a sound I had never made before. It wasn't a word. It was a low, guttural snarl. It was pure, undiluted warning. Mine. The warrior froze, his eyes wide with shock. Lyra stared, her jaw slack. The courtyard went silent. I had not just spoken. I had challenged. From across the yard, a voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "Corbin!" It was Kale. He hadn't shouted, but his voice carried an unmistakable command. The warrior, Corbin, snatched his hand back as if burned, his face pale. He bowed his head low. Alpha. Kale strode towards us, his presence scattering the other wolves like leaves in a storm. He didn't look at Corbin. He didn't look at Lyra. His burning golden eyes were fixed on me. He had seen it. He had heard the predator's sound that had come from the prey's throat. He stopped before me, his shadow falling over us, and I saw a flicker of something new in his gaze. Not curiosity, not command. It was a sliver of dark, dangerous approval. The victim was learning how to bite back. Chapter 9. A shadow in the courtyard. In the days that followed, a fragile routine began to form. I was a ghost in the fortress, always with Kaelin, always silent, always watched. But that single snarl in the training yard had changed something. The pack still distrusted me, but they no longer saw me as merely pathetic. They saw a she-wolf with teeth, however small, and they gave me a wider berth. The only one whose attention seemed to intensify was Kale. I would feel his gaze on me from across the den, from the high battlements, a constant heavy weight on my skin. He was watching, he was waiting. But for what, I didn't know. One afternoon, seeking a moment of peace, I found a small, sun-drenched courtyard deep within the fortress walls. It was quiet, protected, with a small fountain gurgling in the center. I settled Kaelin in his basket in a patch of warm sunlight, his little chest rising and falling in a deep, peaceful sleep. For the first time since my world had ended, I felt a muscle in my soul unclench. The sun felt warm on my face. The sound of the water was soothing. For a fleeting moment, I could almost pretend that I was safe, that I was free. It was a beautiful, dangerous lie. The feeling of being watched returned. But this time, it was different. It wasn't Kale's heavy, commanding presence. This was a light, slithering sensation, like a spider crawling up my spine. The hairs on my arms stood on end, my head snapped up, my eyes scanning the stone walls, the shadowed archways. Nothing. The courtyard was empty. But the air had changed. It tasted wrong. There was a faint scent underneath the smell of wet stone and sunlight, a bitter, metallic odor that didn't belong. Poison. My heart began to hammer against my ribs. I grabbed the handle of Kaelin's basket, my knuckles white. My eyes darted to the top of the wall, to the battlements that ringed the courtyard. A shadow detached itself from the stone. It didn't move like a wolf. It moved like smoke, silent and fluid. A figure, cloaked in black, dropped from the wall, landing on the cobblestones with no more sound than a falling leaf. In its hand was a dagger, its silver blade gleaming with a wicked, oily sheen. A scream lodged in my throat. I stumbled backward, pulling the basket with me, my body a clumsy shield. The assassin flowed forward, its eyes fixed on the sleeping pup. It was impossibly fast. I knew I was dead. I knew we were both dead. Then, the world exploded. A blur of pure black fury shot from a shadowed archway I hadn't even noticed. It was Kale. He moved with a speed that defied nature, a primal force of destruction unleashed. There was no warrior's code, no honorable combat. It was a predator taking down a threat. The clash was a whirlwind of motion. The assassin's desperate lunge, the flash of silver, and Kyle's interception. I heard a sickening crunch as Kale's arm, impossibly strong, shattered the assassin's wrist. The dagger clattered to the ground. The assassin let out a choked gasp, but it was cut short as Kale's other hand clamped around his throat, lifting him clear off the ground. The fight was over before it had truly begun. Kale held the struggling figure against the wall, a low, monstrous growl ripping through his chest. It was the sound of a beast that had been disturbed, and it was the most terrifying sound I had ever heard. He squeezed, and a final, wet crack echoed in the sudden, ringing silence of the courtyard. The body slumped, lifeless. Kyle dropped the corpse to the ground as if it were a piece of garbage. His chest was heaving, his body thrumming with leftover adrenaline. He turned, and his golden eyes, blazing with the feral light of the kill, landed on me. He was the monster from the forest again, all teeth and rage and untamed power. He stalked towards me, his steps heavy, his gaze so intense it felt like a physical blow. I was frozen, pinned by the sheer force of his presence. He didn't stop until he was looming over me. He glanced down, his eyes checking Kaylin first, ensuring the pup was unharmed. Then, his blazing gaze lifted back to my face. The feral rage was still there, but now it was mixed with a raw, terrifying possessiveness. A low growl rumbled deep in his chest, a sound that was both a threat and a vow. "No one," he snarled, his voice a gravelly rasp of pure fury, "touches what is mine." And I knew, with a terrifying, heart-stopping certainty, he wasn't just talking about the pup anymore. Chapter 10: The Phantom Chain. The dead assassin was a stain on the stones of the courtyard, a problem that vanished as quickly and silently as Kale's warriors could make it disappear. But his presence lingered long after, a cold ghost in my thoughts. Kale's declaration, "No one touches what is mine," was a brand on my soul, a possessive claim that was both a shield and a cage. Back in the cold safety of my room, with Kaylin sleeping soundly, the adrenaline finally seeped out of me, leaving behind a tremor in my hands and a deep, rattling unease. Because the monster that had saved me was the same monster who now owned me. I had traded one alpha's cage for another's, and this one was infinitely more dangerous. Later, a soft knock came at the door. I flinched, my heart leaping into my throat. It was Kale. He entered without waiting for an answer, carrying a tray with a bowl of warm stew and a piece of bread. A peace offering? Or the simple act of a man feeding his property? He set the tray on the small table, the silence between us thick and heavy. His rage was gone, banked like the coals of a fire, but the intensity remained. It was in the way he moved, the way his golden eyes tracked my every breath. "You should eat," he said, his voice a low rumble. I nodded, not trusting my own voice. I couldn't look at him. I could only stare at the steam rising from the bowl. He didn't leave. He stood by the hearth, watching me, his presence an overwhelming force in the small room. I felt a desperate, suffocating need for him to go, and an equally terrifying magnetic pull for him to stay. My mind was a tangled mess of fear and a strange, budding gratitude. He had saved our lives. That was a truth I could not ignore. Hesitantly, I took a step towards the table. As I drew closer to him, a searing, white-hot pain suddenly lanced through my chest. It was a phantom agony, an echo from a wound that should have been scarred over, erupting from the exact spot where Lyron's bond had been severed. A strangled gasp tore from my lips, and I recoiled violently, stumbling backward as if I had been struck. The pain was so sharp, so unexpected, it stole my breath. It felt like Lyron. It felt like his cruelty, his hatred, reaching for me across the miles. Kyle saw my reaction. He saw me flinch away from him, my face pale with a pain he could not see. And he misunderstood. Of course he misunderstood. A shadow fell over his face, a mask of cold, hard fury mixed with something that looked devastatingly like self-loathing. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with his sudden, wounded pride. "So," he said, his voice dangerously soft, laced with a bitter poison, "the monster is too much for you after all." The phantom pain began to recede, leaving me trembling and disoriented. I wanted to explain. I wanted to scream that it wasn't him, that it was a ghost from my past that haunted me. But how could I? How could I tell this proud, dangerous alpha that I was still psychically chained to his most hated enemy? To admit that would be to sign my own death warrant. He would see me as a spy, a conduit for Lyron's evil. He would never believe me, because my very body was a traitor. I'm just tired, I lied, the words thin and brittle. Kale didn't believe me. I could see it in the hard set of his jaw. He had offered a moment of quiet consideration, and in his eyes, I had thrown it back in his face. He looked at me for one long, searching moment, his golden eyes filled with a new, colder distance. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out of the room, leaving me alone with the untouched meal and the terrifying secret torment of a chain I could feel but never show. Chapter 11. The Unraveling. The misunderstanding from that night settled like a layer of ice between us. Kale was a distant, brooding storm cloud, his presence colder than ever. He avoided me, speaking only when necessary, his orders delivered through Lyra. Yet his decree held. I was Kalen's shadow, and so I found myself in the Great Hall during a war council, a silent ghost in the corner of a room filled with growling, restless energy. Kale stood before a massive table carved with a map of the territories, his betas and advisors around him. They were discussing the assassin. They had identified the poison on his blade, a rare serpent's venom, a signature of the shadowy eastern clans. "They grow bold," a scarred, one-eyed warrior growled, "to strike within our walls." Another advisor, a wolf named Remus, whose ambition was a sour scent in the air, spoke up. "They strike because they sense weakness, an unknown pup, a stray from a rival pack." His eyes flickered towards me for a half-second, a deliberate, pointed insult. Kale's head snapped up. "Are you questioning my judgment, Remus?" His voice was dangerously low. "I am questioning the wisdom of harboring a snake in our den, Alpha," Remus shot back, emboldened by his own arrogance. "Black Moon's Alpha is a deceitful cur. Who's to say his discarded filth isn't the same? Perhaps she led the assassin right to our door." The accusation hung in the air, a vile poison. Every eye turned to me. I felt the heat of their suspicion, their hatred. I wanted to shrink, to disappear. But then I saw Kale's hands. They were clenched into fists on the tabletop, his knuckles white. A low growl was building in his chest. "That is enough," Kale bit out, his voice tight. But Remus, puffed up with his own importance, pushed further. "Your father was soft on outsiders too. Look where it got him, a knife in the back and his pack almost destroyed. Are you so eager to repeat his mistakes?" That was the trigger. It wasn't a roar. It was a snap. A sound of something fundamental inside Kale breaking apart. His head jerked back, a guttural snarl ripping from his throat. It was a sound of pure, mindless rage. His golden eyes bled to black, the pupils consuming everything. His form began to distort, his bones cracking and shifting under his skin. It was a storm of claws. It was a tempest of teeth. It was the end of the man and the beginning of the monster. His warriors reacted instantly, their movements practiced, desperate. They drew short, heavy clubs, not to kill, but to subdue. A protocol, a terrible, familiar dance. But they were too slow. Kyle, in a blur of half-shifted fury, lunged over the table, his elongated claws aimed directly at Remus's throat. The room erupted in shouts. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the terror on Remus's face, the desperation in the eyes of Kale's warriors. I saw the beast that was about to commit a murder he could never take back. And I moved. I don't know why. It wasn't a thought. It was an instinct, a desperate pull. I shoved the now wailing Kalen into Lyra's stunned arms and ran. I dodged a warrior's outstretched arm and threw myself forward. Just as Kale's claws were about to connect, I slammed my hand onto his shifting forearm. "Kyle!" The world went silent. The monstrous rage, the chaotic energy that had been pouring off him in waves. It just stopped. It was like a hurricane hitting a glass wall. The storm inside him didn't fade. It vanished. He froze, his claws a hair's breadth from Remus's neck. He collapsed, his body shuddering violently as his form receded back to its human shape. He fell to his knees, gasping, sweat pouring down his face. He looked at his own hands, at the claws that had almost murdered his councilman. And then he looked at me. His face was a mask of raw, utter, and complete shock. The entire room was frozen, a tableau of disbelief. The stray, the half-breed, the weakling, had just single-handedly stopped the Alpha's unraveling. And in that moment, everything changed. Chapter 12. The Confession in the Embers. The War Council ended in a stunned, hurried dismissal. Kyle vanished, locking himself away in his private chambers at the top of the highest tower. The pack buzzed with whispers, their gazes following me with a new, unsettling mixture of fear and awe. I was no longer just the pup's protector. I was something else, something they didn't have a name for. That night, I couldn't sleep. A strange, invisible thread seemed to connect me to the tower, a sense of shared pain, of a storm that had been calmed but not cleared. I had to go to him. I didn't know why, but I knew I had to. Leaving Kaylin with a young, nervous she-wolf, I made my way through the silent fortress and up the winding stairs of the Alpha's tower. I expected the door to be barred, but it was unlocked. It was an invitation, or maybe a sign of complete surrender. I pushed it open and slipped inside. The room was vast, filled with maps and weapons, but the only light came from the dying red embers of a massive fireplace. And there he was. He was not the Alpha. He was not the beast. He was just a man. He sat in a high-backed chair before the hearth, his shoulders slumped, his head in his hands. He looked utterly, devastatingly defeated. He didn't look up as I approached. "You should have let them kill me in the forest," he said, his voice a ragged, broken whisper. It was devoid of anger, of command. It held only a vast, empty exhaustion. I stood a few feet away, unsure of what to do, what to say. "You would have killed him," I said softly. "I know," he answered, a shudder running through his massive frame. "One day I will. One day the beast will win and it won't change back." He finally lifted his head, and in the dim, red light of the embers, I saw the raw agony in his face. His golden eyes were haunted. It's a curse in my bloodline, a madness. It took my father. It's what my brother used against me to try and steal my throne. It gets stronger every year, a storm that's slowly eating away the shores of my mind. This was his secret. The source of the cold rage, the iron control. It was all a desperate battle to keep the monster in its cage, because he was terrified of it. He stared into the dying fire, his gaze distant. "I have spent my life building this fortress, training my warriors, making my pack strong, all to contain the weakness inside of me. Every alliance, every battle, it's all been a lie, a performance to convince the world I am a king, not a rabid dog on a chain." He let out a bitter, humorless laugh. "No mate could survive it. The rage, it would tear them apart. It is a poison. And you?" He finally turned his full attention to me, his eyes filled with a pain that eclipsed everything else. "You are the only one who has ever quieted the storm." His confession hung in the air, a raw, bleeding wound. He had laid his greatest shame, his deepest fear, at my feet. He expected me to run. I could see it in his eyes. He expected me to recoil in horror from the monster he believed himself to be. He looked away, his voice dropping to a near whisper, a breath of pure despair that held all the betrayals of his past. "You'll leave me too. Everyone does." The words struck a chord deep inside me. I saw the terrified man behind the beast, the lonely king on his cold, stone throne. And for the first time since Lycan had shattered my world, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel the urge to run. I felt a strange, inexplicable pull to stay. So I took a single, tentative step closer into the warmth of the dying fire. Chapter 13. The Serpent in the Garden. In the wake of Kale's confession, the air in the fortress shifted. The ice between us had cracked, not melted, but a fragile, tentative warmth now existed in the spaces where there was once only cold authority. I saw the glances from the pack change, too. They saw their alpha watching me not just as a guardian of the pup, but as something more. I was no longer an outsider to be feared, but a mystery to be solved, a puzzle intrinsically linked to their leader's survival. With this new precarious status came a sliver of confidence, a belief that I was more than just a survivor of a tragedy. I was an anchor, and an anchor has weight. It has purpose. Driven by this newfound resolve, I refused to be cowed by the memory of the assassin. I took Kaylin back to the small, sunlit courtyard, the very place we were attacked. I would not let fear steal the small pockets of peace I could find. Kaylin, now old enough to crawl, was exploring a patch of moss near the gurgling fountain. The sun was warm, the air was still, and for a moment, the world felt blessedly normal. But my mother had taught me to listen to the world, and the world was screaming. It wasn't a sound, it was a silence. The cheerful chirping of the sparrows that usually filled the courtyard was gone. A fat, black beetle lay on its back by the fountain's edge, its legs curled inward. A squirrel was a still lump of reddish fur under a stone bench. A profound, unnatural stillness had fallen over the garden, a quiet that spoke not of peace, but of death. My eyes darted to the fountain, the source of life in this small enclosure. The water, which was usually crystal clear, had a faint, oily shimmer on its surface, a swirling rainbow that was both beautiful and deeply, horrifyingly wrong. Kaylin was crawling straight towards it, his little hand outstretched to splash in the water. My heart seized. Kaylin, no! I lunged, scooping him up just as his fingers were about to break the surface. He let out a surprised wail, but I held him tight, my back to the fountain, my eyes scanning the courtyard for the source. Who? When? Then I saw him. A stooped figure dressed in a servant's drab tunic was shuffling away through a far archway, his movements just a little too hurried, his head kept a little too low. My first instinct was to scream for the guards, but my second instinct, born of my new, harder reality, was smarter. Screaming would send him running. He would melt away into the fortress, and we'd never know who he was or who had sent him. I needed to trap him. Thinking faster than I ever had in my life, I did the only thing I could. I turned away from the servant, faced the opposite wall, and with all my strength, I shoved a massive, decorative stone urn. It toppled over with a deafening crash, shattering on the cobblestones. In the same breath, I filled my lungs and screamed, not in fear, but in alarm. Fire! The West Wing! The kitchens are on fire! The lie, shouted with all the panicked conviction I could muster, worked better than I could have imagined. Within seconds, the courtyard was flooded with warriors. Their eyes turned not towards me, but towards the west, their minds focused on the false alarm. They swarmed past the archway, cutting off the poisoner's only escape route. I saw him freeze, his shoulders slumping in defeat as two guards, seeing him trying to push against the tide, grabbed him. Just as the chaos reached its peak, Kale arrived. He vaulted over a low wall, his eyes blazing, searching for the source of the commotion. He saw the captured servant, the shattered urn, me clutching a crying Kaylin, and he understood. He strode over, his gaze sweeping over the scene, his sharp mind piecing together the events. He looked at the dead animals, at the shimmering fountain, and finally, at me. And in his eyes, I saw no pity for a frightened victim. I saw a flash of raw, undeniable respect for a quick-thinking strategist, and it was followed by a deeper, fiercer emotion, a possessive pride that made the air between us hum with a dangerous, unspoken truth. Chapter 14. The Candlelit Truce. He confessed. He was sent by my brother. Kyle's voice was a low, flat weight in the quiet of his chambers. Night had fallen, and the fortress was on high alert, a coiled spring of tension. He had summoned me here, not with a command, but with a quiet request delivered by a guard. The room was the same place I had seen him broken, but tonight the fire was roaring, chasing the shadows into the corners. He was the alpha again, powerful and dangerous, but the wall between us had been permanently fractured. He had seen what I could do. He knew I was more than a burden. He gestured to a chair by the fire, then turned to a small table, pouring a cleansing liquid onto a piece of cloth. "You were hurt," he stated. It wasn't a question. I looked down at my arm. A long, shallow scrape from the falling urn was bleeding sluggishly. a wound I hadn't even noticed in the adrenaline of the moment. Before I could protest, he was in front of me, gently taking my arm in his massive hand. His touch was firm, careful, a strange contradiction to the raw power I knew he possessed. He began to clean the wound, his movements economical and precise. The act was so unexpectedly tender, so domestic, that it left me breathless. This was the beast from the forest, the monster who had almost murdered his own councilman, tending to my minor wound as if it were the most important task in the world. The silence stretched, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the sound of our breathing. "Thank you," he said, his voice a low rumble, his eyes still fixed on his task. "For saving him, again. Your mind is sharp." "I just did what I had to do," I whispered, my skin tingling where his fingers brushed against mine. He finished cleaning the scrape, and his hand lingered on my arm, his thumb stroking softly over my skin. He finally lifted his head, and his golden eyes met mine. The firelight danced in their depths, and I saw a universe of conflict there. The king, the beast, the lonely man. "Your presence here," he said, his voice rough with an emotion I couldn't name. "It is the only quiet I have felt in years. When the rage comes, it is a storm, a noise that drowns out everything. But you," he shook his head slightly, as if in disbelief. "You are the silence after." My heart ached at his words, at the raw vulnerability he was showing me. "Your fortress," I admitted, my voice trembling slightly. "It is the first place I have ever felt strong." The air between us grew thick, charged with everything that had passed between us, the terror, the violence, the shared secrets, the desperate need. He leaned in, his gaze dropping to my lips. This was it. The moment that had been building since he first found me in the woods. The world narrowed to the space between our mouths, to the scent of pine and wood smoke, to the heat radiating from his body. My eyes fluttered shut. He stopped, his lips a breath away from mine. I could feel the shudder that ran through him, the monumental effort of his self-control. He pulled back, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I cannot," he whispered, his voice hoarse with regret. "I cannot offer you anything but danger, Celine. I cannot be the monster that destroys the only peace I have ever known." It wasn't a rejection. It was a confession, a sacrifice. He was pushing me away to protect me from himself. And in that moment, I made my choice. I would not be pushed. I would not run. I lifted my hand and placed it gently on his rough, unshaven cheek. He froze, his golden eyes wide with surprise. I said nothing. I just held his gaze, my touch a silent promise, a vow that I was not afraid, that I would not leave. I had chosen my side, and it was with the broken, dangerous man who believed he was a monster. Chapter 15. The Brothers' Gambit. The next morning, the fortress was a hive of controlled chaos. The poisoner had talked. Valerius, Cale's exiled, traitorous brother, was no longer a shadow hiding in the east. He was a declared threat, gathering rogue packs to his banner, preparing for a direct assault on the throne. The name was on everyone's lips, a curse spoken in hushed, angry tones. Every warrior sharpened his blade. Every sentry's eyes were a little harder, a little more alert. The game had changed. This was no longer about assassins in the dark. This was about a war in the daylight. In the middle of the tense morning preparations, a lone rider was spotted, approaching the fortress under a white flag of truce. A parley. The laws of such things were ancient and sacred, even among enemies. Cale met the rider at the main gate, flanked by Lyra and his personal guard, his face a mask of cold fury. I watched from a high window, Calen asleep in my arms, my heart a cold knot of dread in my chest. This felt wrong. It was too bold, too public. The rider, a sneering wolf with a scarred face, dismounted. He did not look at the mighty alpha before him. His eyes scanned the battlements, searching. "I bring a message from the true Alpha Valerius," he announced, his voice loud and arrogant. "But it is not for the usurper." His gaze found me in the window. He pointed. "It is for her, the she-wolf from Black Moon." A collective growl rumbled through the assembled warriors. Kyle's body went rigid, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. I saw the raw, possessive fury flare in his eyes. To be so publicly bypassed, to have his authority ignored at his own gate. It was the gravest of insults. For a moment, I thought he would break the truce and tear the messenger apart. But he was an alpha. He was a king. With a visible effort, he mastered his rage. "Bring her," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous growl. My legs felt like lead as I was escorted to the gate. The eyes of the pack were on me, filled with a new, sharper suspicion. Why me? What did the enemy want with me? I stood before the messenger, my chin held high, Kaelin a warm, solid weight against me. The messenger unrolled a scroll. "My Lord Valerius sends you greetings," he said, his tone mocking. "He knows what you are. He knows of the unique gift you possess, a gift that tames the beast." My blood ran cold. How could he know? "He offers you a choice," the messenger continued. "Remain with the monster who will only use you as a leash for his own madness, a tool he will discard when his beast finally consumes him, or join a new pack, a pack that will honor your power. He offers you true freedom, a place of power at his side, and his sworn protection from all your enemies, including the broken alpha who holds you now, and the cruel one who cast you aside." It was a serpent's promise, a beautiful, tempting lie designed to shatter the fragile trust I had built here. Valerius wasn't just trying to recruit a soldier, he was trying to steal Kael's anchor. He was trying to steal his hope. Every eye was on me. Kael's face was unreadable, a mask of stone, but I could feel the tension radiating from him, the desperate, unspoken question. This was a test of loyalty more profound than any battle. I looked at the smug messenger, at the waiting warriors, at the cold, hard face of the alpha who had confessed his brokenness to me in the firelight. I thought of his gentle touch. I thought of his possessive fury. I thought of his whispered fear that I, too, would leave him. My voice, when it came, was clear and steady, ringing with a certainty that surprised even me. "Tell your master," I said, looking the messenger directly in the eye, "that I am not a prize to be won, nor a tool to be wielded." I took a step back towards Kael. "I have already chosen my place." Then, I turned my back on the messenger, on Valerius's offer, and walked to stand beside Kael. I had made my public declaration. I had drawn my line in the blood-soaked dirt of their war, and in the sudden, sharp intake of Kael's breath beside me, I understood that I was no longer a pawn in this game. I was the reason the war was about to begin. Chapter 16: The Withering. The declaration at the gate had forged a new world. The space between Kyle and me was no longer a chasm of suspicion, but a bridge built of shared secrets and a fierce, unspoken alliance. For the first time, I felt like a partner, not a possession. We stood together in the war room, the great stone chamber feeling less like a cage and more like a command center. A sense of purpose hummed in the air. We were a pack united against a common foe. We were preparing for a war against his brother. We were fools. We were looking at the wrong enemy. It began without a sound. Kael was leaning over the map table, his finger tracing a potential ambush point in the northern passes, when he suddenly flinched. A sharp, ragged gasp escaped his lips. He pressed a hand to his chest, his knuckles white. "Kael?" Lyra asked, her voice sharp with concern. At the exact same moment, a cold, familiar, slithering sensation coiled in the pit of my stomach. It was the phantom chain, the dead bond to Lyran, pulsing with a sick, triumphant energy I had never felt before. It was awake, and it was hungry. My own breath hitched, a wave of nausea washing over me. This was no memory, this was active, this was now. Kael stumbled back from the table, a look of confusion on his face. "Something is wrong," he gritted out, his voice strained. He wasn't raging. He wasn't shifting. It was the opposite. The sheer, vibrant life force that always radiated from him, the overwhelming power that defined him. It was dimming, like a great fire being starved of air. He swayed on his feet, and before anyone could catch him, he collapsed to the stone floor, his body convulsing once before lying terrifyingly still. Chaos erupted. Warriors shouted. Lyra screamed his name. The old shaman pushed his way through the crowd, his weathered face a mask of grim urgency. I was frozen in place, paralyzed by the twin horrors of Kale's collapse and the vile, pulsing connection I felt to it. I knew. With a certainty that was a poison in my own veins, I knew who was doing this. The shaman knelt beside Kale, his hands hovering over the alpha's chest. Black, spiderweb-thin veins were beginning to creep up Kale's neck, a visible sign of a deep and profound sickness. His breathing was shallow, a faint whisper of air. He was being emptied, drained. "It is a death curse," the shaman pronounced, his voice shaking with a rare fear, woven with blood and bond magic. "It is not a poison I can draw out. It is an unraveling of his very life force." The words hit me like a physical blow. Bond magic. My bond. Our broken, severed phantom bond was the weapon. Lycan was on the other end of that chain, and he was pulling, draining Kale's life away and pouring it into the void. My past was a serpent, and it had just sunk its fangs into my future. The shaman looked up, his ancient, knowing eyes finding mine across the room. He didn't know how, but he knew I was connected. I rushed to Kale's side, dropping to my knees. I placed my hands on his chest, desperately trying to push my anchoring energy into him, to give him a foothold against the tide. It was like trying to fill the ocean with a single cup of water. His life was pouring out of him, a torrent of stolen vitality, and my power was nothing against it. The black veins continued their spidery march up his skin, a map of his own demise. He was dying. Right here, in front of me, he was withering away, and I was the weapon being used to kill him. Chapter 17. The Serpent's Bargain Time lost all meaning. Kale lay on his great fur-covered bed, a king reduced to a pale, dying effigy. His breathing was a faint, shallow whisper, each tiny puff of air a victory against the inevitable. The shaman had tried everything: ancient chants, powerful herbs, protective runes painted on the doorways. Nothing worked. The curse was a living thing, an insidious parasite with its roots wrapped around Kale's very soul, and it was drawing its strength from a source they could not see or fight. It was drawing its strength from me. I sat by his side, my hands on his chest, pouring every ounce of my will, my energy, my very being into him. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. The fortress was in turmoil, a ship that had lost its captain in the middle of a raging storm. It's a pity, isn't it? To watch him fade like a guttering candle. The voice slithered into my mind, as smooth and cold as a snake sliding over ice. It was Lycan. He wasn't shouting. He was whispering to me across the miles, using the phantom chain as his own private causeway into my soul. I flinched, my head whipping around, but of course no one was there. "Leave me alone," I thought, my mind screaming the words. "Oh, but I can't," he purred, his mental voice dripping with amusement. "We're connected, you and I. And through you, I am connected to him. It's a beautiful piece of magic, really. The bond I created to claim you is now the very weapon that is killing your new pet." Tears of rage and despair streamed down my face. I looked at Kale's still form, at the dark veins that now covered his hands and arms. He was so cold. "But I am not an unreasonable man," Lycan continued, his tone shifting to one of magnanimous generosity. "I am, after all, your true, fated mate. His death gives me no pleasure. Well, not much." A flicker of his cruel amusement lanced through me. "I am willing to offer you a bargain, a choice." I didn't answer. I didn't want to engage, but I was listening. I was desperate. The curse is tied to my life force and to our bond, he explained, like a teacher instructing a slow student. His life is pouring out to fill the void you created when you rejected me. There is only one way to seal the leak. You must willingly pour your energy back into our bond. You must accept me again. The suggestion was so vile, so horrifying, that a wave of nausea rose in my throat. Never. I would rather die. And he will die with you, Lycan whispered, sensing my revulsion. That is the choice, his life, or your precious misplaced pride. It's quite simple. You need only find a quiet place. Say the words. Open the door you slammed shut in my face. Willingly reaffirm the bond that the goddess gave us just for a moment, just long enough to sever the curse's connection to him. Do that, and he will live. The trap was perfect. It was brilliant in its cruelty. If I refused, Kale died, and Valerius would likely sweep in and destroy what was left of the pack. If I agreed, I would be saving Kale's life by shackling my soul back to the monster who had tried to destroy it. And what would Kale think? He would feel it. He would know. To him, it would be the ultimate betrayal. He would see it as me choosing Lycan over him. He would see it as proof of his deepest fear, that I, too, would abandon him. Lycan's voice was a final, triumphant whisper in my mind. Choose my little stray. His life, or his love. Either way, a part of him will be mine to destroy. I looked at Kale's face, at the memory of his confession by the firelight, at the ghost of the man who had called me his peace. I had to choose between his body and his heart, and I knew, with a certainty that shattered my own soul, that there was no choice at all. Chapter 18. The Price of a Life. I found a small unused chamber deep in the stone belly of the fortress, a place for meditation that was now just a room of dust and silence. This was where I would perform my own execution. My hands shook so badly I could barely light the single candle that was the only requirement for Lycan's sick ritual. The flame flickered, casting my trembling shadow against the cold stone wall. It felt like a violation. It felt like willingly walking back into a fire that had already burned me to the bone. Every instinct, every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, to let fate take its course. But then Kale's face floated in my mind's eye. The flicker of respect when I'd trapped the poisoner. The raw vulnerability when he'd confessed his fears. The possessive fury when he'd named me his. I could not let him die. Closing my eyes, I took a deep, shuddering breath. I whispered the words Lycan had put in my head, an ancient phrase of acceptance, of yielding. My bond is yours. My spirit is yours. I accept what is fated. The moment the words left my lips, the world went black. A torrent of foul, triumphant energy slammed into me. It was the feeling of Lycan's magic, his essence, his very being, pouring into the empty spaces of my soul, wrapping around my heart like a cold, possessive chain. It was agony, a spiritual violation so profound it ripped a silent scream from my soul. I collapsed to my knees, tears of relief and revulsion streaming down my face. Because through the pain, I could feel the other connection, the one to Kale, severing. The curse was broken. Across the fortress, in the Alpha's tower, Kale's heart stuttered, then beat with a sudden, powerful stroke. Color flooded back into his face. The black, spidery veins receded from his skin, vanishing as if they were never there. He took a deep, shuddering breath, his lungs filling with air, his strength returning in a dizzying, life-affirming rush. He was alive. He was whole. But the first thing he felt was not relief. It was a psychic cataclysm, a shockwave of pure betrayal that was more painful than any death curse. He felt her. He felt Celine, his anchor, his silence, his one fragile hope. And her essence was suddenly, inextricably, and sickeningly entangled with the foul, tainted magic of Lycan. He could feel the chain that now bound her to his enemy. He could feel her bond, a sacred, fated thing, given willingly to another. With a roar of pure, heart-shattering agony, he threw back the furs and rose from the bed. He was not the beast. He was not the Alpha. He was just a man whose heart had been ripped from his chest. He stormed through the fortress, his warriors falling back in shock at his sudden recovery, and the aura of utter devastation that rolled off him. He followed the psychic trail of her betrayal, a burning beacon of pain that led him right to the meditation chamber. He threw the door open. I looked up, my face streaked with tears, my body trembling from the ritual. I saw him standing there, strong and alive, and a wave of desperate relief washed over me. "Kyle, I can explain." But the words died in my throat. The look in his eyes stopped me dead. It wasn't the fury of the beast. It wasn't the cold command of the alpha. It was a cold, shattered emptiness. A devastation so absolute, it was like looking into a grave. He had been right. Everyone left him. And now, I had proven to be the most treacherous of them all. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. His voice, when it came, was a dead, hollow thing that echoed in the crushing silence of the room. "Get out." He turned his back on me, his broad shoulders conveying a sense of finality more absolute than any wall. I had saved his life, and in doing so, I had lost him forever. Chapter 19. A Vision in the Dark. The silence of my new prison was a different kind. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence of the tomb. Kyle had cast me out of his sight, placing me in a remote, forgotten room in the fortress's eastern wing. A true prisoner now. My heart, which had been shattered, then stitched back together with fragile hope, was now just a hollow, aching void. I had done the right thing. I had saved the man I was growing to love, and in return, I had received the one punishment I could not bear, his belief that I had betrayed him. I spent the days numb, staring at the stone walls, feeling the disgusting, parasitic warmth of Lyran's reclaimed bond coiling in my gut. This was my life now, a living sacrifice, a queen of ashes. Meanwhile, in his high tower, Kale was consumed by a grief that was colder and sharper than any rage. He had locked the world out, the pain of my betrayal a fresh, gaping wound he could not allow anyone to see. The fortress below was paralyzed, its alpha a ghost haunting his own throne, its future uncertain. The pack felt his despair like a physical chill in the air, a leaderless dread that left them vulnerable, waiting for an enemy blow they knew was coming. It was Lyra, her face etched with a worry that superseded her animosity, who finally broke his isolation. She did not come with words. She came with Kalen. She entered the darkened chambers and placed the fussing pup in his cradle near the cold hearth, then retreated without a sound. For a long while, Kale did not move. He just sat in the shadows, a monument to his own heartbreak. But the pup, sensing his father's immense, crushing sorrow, began to cry. It was a sound of pure empathy, a reflection of the pain that filled the room. Finally, Kale rose and went to the cradle. He looked down at the child he had almost lost, the heir he had saved at the cost of his own heart. As he reached down to comfort him, Kalen's tiny hand shot out and grabbed his finger. And then, something happened. It wasn't a vision, not a clear picture. It was a flash of raw, undiluted feeling that poured from the child directly into the alpha's mind. He felt it. He felt the sickening violation of Lyran's magic. He felt the agonizing choice, the feeling of a soul being torn in two. He tasted the bitter, self-loathing sacrifice she had made. And underneath it all, a current so powerful it buckled his knees, an overwhelming, desperate wave of her love for him, the very love that had fueled her terrible decision. It was a truth felt, not seen. A truth that was a complete, shocking contradiction to the foul magic he could still sense wrapped around her. Could it be? Could he have been so wrong? The seed of doubt, small but powerful, had been planted in the barren ground of his grief. At that very same moment, in my own dark room, I was staring at my reflection in a pail of water. I saw a ghost, a pathetic, hollow-eyed creature who had spent her entire life being defined by the whims of others, Lyran's cruelty, Kale's pain. My value had always been a reflection in their eyes. The despair was so complete, so absolute, that it circled back on itself, burning away into a strange, cold clarity. The tears stopped. The shaking ceased. A fire, cold and hard as a diamond, ignited in the hollow space in my chest. I had been a victim. I had been a survivor. I had been a sacrifice. No more. My worth was not a thing to be given or taken by any alpha. It was mine. My life was mine. And my future would be forged not by their hands, but by my own. I would not wait to be rescued. I would not beg to be understood. I would simply be free, and I would free myself, whatever the cost. Chapter 20. The Queen's Gambit. My new resolve was a cold, sharp weapon in my hands. The time for weeping was over. The time for action had come. I began to move with a purpose that felt foreign and exhilarating. I was no longer a prisoner waiting for a judgment. I was a strategist planning a war. I remembered my mother's stories, the hushed whispers of the old magic, the peasant remedies the pack had scorned. They were remedies for ailments of the soul as much as the body. And the phantom chain that bound me to Lycan was the deepest soul sickness of all. I began to gather what I needed. It was a strange, desperate collection. I scraped iron dust from the bars on my window, its metallic tang a promise of strength. I saved the salt from my meals, a symbol of purification. I found a specific, silvery moss growing in the damp cracks between the stone floor, a plant my mother said could quiet angry ghosts. I was preparing for a ritual of my own, not one of acceptance, but of absolute and permanent severance. My strange activities did not go unnoticed. One evening, the heavy door to my room opened, and Lyra stood there, her arms crossed, her icy eyes narrowed with suspicion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her gaze falling on the small, strange pile of ingredients I had gathered on the floor. "What is this? Witchcraft?" A week ago, I would have flinched. I would have stammered an excuse. Now I simply looked up and met her gaze, my own calm and steady. "I am freeing myself," I said, my voice even. "Lycan's hold on me is a weapon he will continue to use against this pack, and against your alpha. I am going to destroy it." Lyra stared, her suspicion warring with a dawning curiosity. She had been there when Kale had returned from my room after the curse was broken, had seen the dead look in his eyes. She had also been there when he'd emerged from his tower after Kalen had touched him, a flicker of confused hope warring with his grief. She was a warrior, a pragmatist, and she knew the pack was hanging by a thread. The shaman says such a bond cannot be broken, only rejected or accepted. "The shaman follows the old wolf laws," I countered, my voice gaining strength. "My mother followed the older laws of the earth. Her magic was quiet, but it was deep. I will not be Lycan's puppet, and I will not be the weakness that tears your pack apart." My conviction, my cold, hard certainty, seemed to strike a chord in the beta. She saw not a hysterical stray, but a woman with a plan. She was faced with a choice. She could cling to her distrust and let the pack continue to founder in its leader's grief, vulnerable to the two armies that were surely preparing to march on them. Or she could take a chance on the witch in the tower. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice clipped, but the open hostility was gone, replaced by a grudging respect. It was a start. It was a fragile, unspoken alliance, but it was more than I'd had a day ago. Before I could answer her, a sound from far below cut through the quiet of the fortress. A single urgent blast from a sentry's horn echoing up the stone walls. It was followed by another, and then another. A cry, faint but clear, drifted up from the battlements. "Banners! Black moon banners on the ridge!" Lyra's face went pale. We both looked towards the window, towards the darkening horizon. My blood ran cold. He was here. Lycan had come to collect his property, and my ritual, my one chance at freedom, was not yet ready. Chapter 21. The Eve of War. The fortress exploded into a controlled frenzy. War horns sounded a deep, resonant challenge to the invaders below. The clang of steel on steel and the shouts of warriors arming themselves echoed through the stone corridors. The air, once thick with grief, now tasted of adrenaline and fear. I rushed to the window, my heart a frantic drum. Below, stretching across the valley floor, was an army. The black banners of the Black Moon Pack snapped in the wind, a sea of hostile wolves, their faces upturned towards the fortress, their eyes filled with a predatory hunger. And at their head, mounted on a massive black warhorse, was Alpha Lycan. He was a figure of dark, arrogant perfection, and I could feel his possessive gaze on me even from this distance. "Come to me, my Luna." His voice slithered into my mind, a confident, triumphant purr that made my skin crawl. "Your true place is at my side. End this farce. Open the gates." I recoiled from the window, pressing my hands to my temples, trying to block out his psychic poison. He was using the bond to torment me, to weaken my resolve before the first arrow was even fired. "You belong to me, Celine. The goddess herself decreed it." The door to my chamber burst open. It was Kale. He was clad in black leather and steel, the alpha of the Draven Pack in his full, terrifying glory. But his face was a storm of conflict. The seed of doubt Kalen had planted was at war with the raw, visceral feeling of my perceived betrayal. He didn't know what to believe, what to trust. He only knew one thing. He strode into the room, his presence filling the small space, his golden eyes burning into mine. The sounds of his pack preparing for battle faded into a dull roar behind him. There was only the crackling, charged silence between us. He didn't apologize. He didn't ask for an explanation. The pain was still too raw for that. "He will not have you," he said, his voice a low, guttural promise. I looked at him, at the man I had saved and lost, at the king going to war for a woman he thought had betrayed him. My own resolve hardened into something unbreakable. "I know," I said, my voice steady, clear, "because I am not his to take." He stopped, his eyes searching my face. He saw the change. He saw the fear was gone, replaced by a cold, unyielding fire. This was not the broken stray he had found dying in the woods. This was not the timid healer who flinched at every raised voice. This was someone else, a queen in her own right, preparing for her own battle. A deep, booming blast from a Black Moon war horn shook the very foundations of the tower. The attack was beginning. The moment between us was shattered. Kale had to go. He had a pack to lead, a fortress to defend. He gave me one last, long, unreadable look, a look filled with pain, with doubt, with a flicker of something that might have been wonder. And then he was gone, his footsteps echoing down the hall as he ran to meet the coming storm. I turned back to my small pile of salt and iron and moss. The war for the fortress had begun. But my own war, the one that truly mattered, was about to be fought right here, in the quiet of this room, with the sounds of battle raging all around me. I had to sever the chain. I had to free myself before Lycan broke through these walls and tried to claim me by force. Chapter 22. The Claiming. The world was a symphony of chaos. The outer gate had been breached, and the courtyard was a swirling vortex of snarling wolves and clanging steel. From my high window, the battle was a terrible, beautiful dance of death, and in the heart of it all, I saw Kale. He was a force of nature, a whirlwind of destruction, his every move a testament to the raw power of an alpha at war. But I could feel his control fraying. I could feel the rage building, fueled by the relentless assault, by the grief in his heart, by the sight of Lycan's black banner waving over his home. Then, he saw him. Lycan, cutting a bloody path through the defenders, his eyes fixed on my tower. And that was all it took. The last thread of Kale's control snapped. A roar, born not of a man but of a primal, untamed beast, tore through the battlefield. He began to shift, his body contorting, growing, becoming the monster from his nightmares. He was no longer a king defending his fortress. He was a storm of rage, and he was about to break his entire world. At that exact moment, in the quiet of my chamber, my own battle ended. With a final, agonized scream that had no sound, I ripped the last vestiges of Lyran's phantom bond from my soul. The chain shattered. The connection died. I was free. I stumbled, gasping, my body suddenly light, my spirit my own for the first time in my life. The sounds of the war outside crashed back in on me. I knew what I had to do. I ran. I flew down the tower stairs, a woman propelled by a single terrifying purpose. I burst out into the war-torn courtyard. The chaos parted around me, wolves from both packs freezing for a half-second at the sight of the strange she-wolf walking calmly into the heart of the slaughter. I ignored the shouts. I ignored the clashing steel. My eyes were fixed on the monstrous, half-shifted form of Kale as he held one of his own warriors pinned to the ground, his claws raised for a killing blow. Lyran saw me. "Celine!" he bellowed, a note of triumphant fury in his voice. "Come to me. Your alpha commands you." I didn't even glance his way. I walked straight towards the beast. It turned its head, its black, soulless eyes fixing on me. A low, guttural snarl rumbled in its chest. It saw me as another threat, another enemy to be torn apart. It lunged. I did not run. I stood my ground, my heart a calm, steady drum in my chest. Just as the monster reached me, its claws extended, its fangs bared, I lifted my hand and placed it flat against the center of its heaving, fur-covered chest. The world seemed to hold its breath. I looked into the black void of the beast's eyes, and I spoke to the man I knew was trapped inside. My voice was not a shout. It was a clear, quiet whisper that somehow cut through the clamor of war. "You are not rage." A shudder ran through the massive creature. The snarl died in its throat. "You are mine." My anchoring power, pure and untainted now, flowed from my palm directly into his soul, a river of calm in his ocean of fury. But it wasn't enough. To heal him, to save him, I had to do more than just anchor him. I had to claim him. In front of 2 armies, under the blood-streaked sky, I rose on my toes. I ignored the gasps of shock, the shouts of disbelief. I leaned in, turned my head, and sank my teeth into the thick muscle of his shoulder. It was not a bite of anger or of passion. It was a mark of ownership, a claiming, a shockwave, psychic and absolute, pulsed from the point of contact. The beast roared, a sound of agony and release, and then it simply dissolved. The monstrous form receded, the black eyes cleared, and Kale was left on his knees before me, sane and whole and breathing my name like a prayer. Chapter 23. The Alpha's Bow. A profound, ringing silence fell over the battlefield. Friend and foe alike stared, their weapons forgotten, their faces a mixture of awe and disbelief. They had just witnessed the impossible. The rejected stray from Black Moon, the quiet, fearful girl, had just tamed their alpha's monstrous rage and marked him as her own property, an act of dominance no she-wolf had dared to attempt in living memory. The power dynamic of the entire world had just been rewritten. Lyran, his face a mask of apoplectic fury, was the first to break the spell. He saw his psychic chain was gone. He saw his fated mate claiming another. With a scream of pure, thwarted rage, he charged. His sword raised high, aimed directly at me. "You are mine!" he shrieked. But he was not fighting a mindless beast anymore. Kyle rose to his feet, moving with a fluid grace, and intercepted the charge. He did not have the wild fury of the beast, but he had something far more dangerous, a cold, clear purpose. His eyes were fixed on Lyran, but his entire being was focused on me, a silent protector standing guard. The duel between the 2 alphas was a blur of silver and shadow, but it was brutally short. Kale, anchored and focused, disarmed Lyran with a move of shocking efficiency, sending his sword spinning across the cobblestones. He kicked the back of Lyran's knee, forcing him to the ground. Kale stood over his defeated rival, the tip of his own blade at Lyran's throat. Every wolf on that field expected the killing blow. Justice. Vengeance. It was the law of their world. But Kale didn't move. He lifted his gaze from the pathetic, defeated alpha at his feet and looked at me. His golden eyes, filled with 1,000 unspoken emotions, were asking a question. He was ceding the judgment. He was giving the final decision. To me. It was an act of deference so profound, so unheard of, that a collective gasp rippled through both packs. I looked at Lyran, at the man who had shattered my world, who had called me worthless and left me to die. I could end him. I could command his death, and Kale would grant it without question. But as I looked at him, I felt nothing. No hatred, no need for revenge. He was just a sad, cruel man whose power over me was gone. Exile, I said, my voice clear and strong. Let him live with his shame. He is not worth the blood on your blade. Kyle nodded once, a sharp, final gesture. He pulled his blade away and gestured to his warriors. Take him. Leave him 100 leagues north. If he ever crosses our lands again, kill him on sight. As Lyran was dragged away, screaming impotent threats, Kale turned back to me. The battle was won. The threat was over. In front of 2 armies, in the middle of the blood-soaked courtyard, the mighty alpha of the Draven pack did something that shattered every tradition, every law they had ever known. He slowly, deliberately, dropped to one knee. He bowed his head before me. It was not the submission of a subject. It was the reverence of a partner, the devotion of a man who had been lost in a storm and had finally found his harbor. He had been a king who believed he was a monster. Now he was simply a man kneeling before his queen. Chapter 24. The Queen's Mark. Weeks later, the sky was once again painted with the deep, ominous red of a blood moon. But this time, it was not a portent of doom. It was a promise. The fortress was quiet, the sounds of war replaced by the tentative murmurs of a new beginning. The remaining warriors of the Black Moon Pack, those who had bent the knee, were being integrated, their black banners now hanging beside the silver Draven wolf. The peace was fragile, but it was real. I stood on the high battlements, the same place I had once watched Lyran's army assemble. Kalen, now a sturdy toddler who was already showing signs of his father's strength and my calm, held my hand, his eyes wide with wonder at the crimson moon. The air was cool and clean, and for the first time, it felt like home. He will have your eyes, I think. Kale's voice was a low, warm rumble beside me. He came to stand next to me, his presence no longer an overwhelming force but a comforting warmth. He looked not at the moon but at me, his golden eyes soft in the red light. We had talked, in the quiet hours of the nights that followed the battle. We had unburdened our souls. He had apologized for his doubt, for his pain-fueled blindness, and I had forgiven him because I understood the depth of the wound he carried. A claiming must be answered, he said softly, his gaze intense. Your mark on me was a declaration, a question. This, he gestured to the moon, the packs below, the peaceful valley, is the beginning of the answer. He gently turned me to face him, his large, warm hands resting on my shoulders. But a vow must be sealed. Under the watchful eye of the blood moon, he leaned in. He did not take me with the hungry passion of a possessive alpha. He moved with a reverence, a tenderness that spoke of a love that had been forged in the deepest fires. He tilted my head to the side, his lips brushing against my skin, and then, gently, he marked me. His teeth sank into my neck, a brief, sharp pressure that sent a wave of pure, unadulterated ecstasy through every cell in my body. The bond, their bond, forged not by a fickle goddess but by choice and sacrifice, slammed into place. It was not a chain. It did not feel like being owned. It felt like being found. Later, we stood before the newly united pack. A great bonfire roared in the center of the courtyard, casting dancing shadows on the faces of the wolves who were now one people. Kale held my hand, our fingers intertwined, a symbol of the new world they were all witnessing. He raised our joined hands for all to see. "You knew her as a stray from a rival pack," he called out, his voice ringing with a power and a joy that echoed off the stone walls. "She was cast aside as unworthy." He turned his gaze to me, his golden eyes filled with a love so profound it stole my breath. "Now, she is my anchor. She is my heart." He looked back to the crowd, his voice dropping to a low, possessive, and proud declaration. "She is my queen, my forever." He didn't say Luna. He said queen, a new title, for a new beginning. And as I stood beside him, with our son between us, under the light of the blood moon that had once seen my execution, I finally understood. I was not the weak, human-tainted girl. I was not the Alpha's rejected mate. I was Celine Vera, and my story was just beginning.